Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Forge of Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Alex Uli, and this is episode 113 of the Forge of Freedom. Today, I have a special guest coming along with me today from Belo Horizonte, I almost got that incorrect, Brazil, Marina Rocha. She is an apprentice at the Mises Institute, which is where I found out about her. She wrote an article there that is going to be the main discussion or the main topic of discussion for today. But she also works as an economic advisor to city councilors across Brazil, and she has a position in finance. And the article we're going to be talking about today is called "The Only Good One is a Closed One: No Reform of Government Schools." In this article, delves into the state of educational institutions, and we'll talk about the status of the educational institutions there in Brazil, as well as here in the United States. The article goes into political indoctrination and reading and math proficiency and prolonged school closures, and sort of what libertarian theory says about what possible solutions there are to this problem. So with that being said, Marina, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming along.
Thanks for having me.
So, and just at the outset here, just so everybody knows, English is not Marina's native language. Her native language is Portuguese, but I think you'll find her conversation very easy to follow. It's quite good. In our discussion prior to the show, prior to hitting the record button, I don't think you'll have any trouble at all. Marina's very proficient in English, so I think you'll enjoy the discussion. So first of all, Marina, you heard my introduction. Would you talk just a little bit about, at the outset, how did you get connected with the Mises Institute? And then also, if you don't mind, to talk a little bit about your consulting with counselors, city councilors around the country of Brazil. I think that's really interesting as well.
So I got to know the Mises Institute through my job. I know you guys had the Mises Institute in the US because we also have Mises Brazil here that was inspired by the Institute. But my boss at the Libertarian think tank, he's a big fan of the Institute, and he always talks about the things they publish there and always talked about always recommended reading and things related to the Institute. So I got to their website in 2022, and I discovered they had this thing called Mises University that was 1 week in Auburn, Alabama, where people could talk about libertarian and Austrian economic related topics. So I applied. I got in 2022, so I got to see the Institute. I went to Auburn back then, and then I saw how good things are run there and how good they really want everyone to learn Austrian economics, and they really want to help you. If you have a project related to that, they are always there to help. So because of that, next year, meaning 2023, I went again to the Institute for Mises University. And after that, I heard that they had the apprentice program. So I applied to it and I got in, basically. The other job related to the city councilors in Brazil, I basically look through budget things because every year in Brazil, we have this legislation that Congress, I don't know how it works in the US, but here, every level of government, like citywide, statewide, and federal level of government, they have to approve budgets. They have to approve the annual budget for the next year. So this year, they're voting the 2025 budget bills. So basically, I look at these bills. I look at the, 1,000-page files, 200-page files with budgets, and I see what I can cut off and what I can do to reduce government spending and reduce the size of government at the local city level. So I make reports, and I advise city councilors on what they can cut off and what they should look up while looking at the budget, what they should question the mayors about. 2 years ago, I almost sent a mayor to jail because he had very, very corrupt things in his budget. He approved 10 million in our currency. I don't know if it's 2 million in US dollars, probably, and non-approved credit. He took money that he could not borrow. So I appointed that to our partner, our client, that is a city councilor in a small town here at my state. And she raised awareness about that, and because of that, the guy almost went to jail, and he was not able to run in the 2022 election as a congressman, which was good because that there is like one less corrupt politician in our country to mess things up, basically. So that's
Yeah.
basically what I do.
Oh, very, very cool. So I'm glad you mentioned that because I think this is really awesome for a number of reasons. But not only are you trying to rein in corruption and spending and make a difference at the local level, uh, but so many libertarians, it seems like, especially the ones that you see a lot on the internet, are sort
Yeah.
of armchair philosophers. They talk a lot, they say a lot, but don't engage at the local level much at all. And so I love your example of getting involved at the local level to try to make a difference and exert or sort of use libertarian principles and philosophy to create more freedom and less government. So that's amazing. So I don't want to make an offer to people that is not approved of by you, but I think, would you be willing, I guess, to, if people are interested in getting more involved in things like what you're doing, would you mind to chat with them and be a resource to them?
No, I wouldn't mind. If they
Yeah,
have any
yeah,
questions, they can ask me.
perfect. Well, I will link to your bio on the Mises Institute website, and your contact
Thanks.
information is there, so people can find that in the show notes if they want to get in touch with you. So uh, I'll make that easily available. Now let's get into the article a little bit here. First of all, the title is pretty intriguing. The only good one is a closed one: no reform of government schools, which of course points at, and this is a hot topic among libertarian circles even. There are
Yeah.
many libertarians who want to try to fix the current system, whether that's in Brazil or in the United States, largely through reform in the form of school choice, right? Where they say that essentially tax dollars that are already being taken away through force for government schools should follow the child, and the government should decide how to spend those tax dollars as long as it's a pre-approved school by the government.
Yeah,
Um,
they say like fund students, not systems, right? It's a thing that I hear a lot
yeah,
among people who advocate for school choice.
yeah, yeah. That's exactly right. That's a pretty typical slogan or tagline for that school choice movement. But then the other position that many libertarians, and the one that you advocate for, is just abolition. Let's get rid of as many government schools as possible, all of them if we can.
Yeah.
So would you mind to, I guess, number one, tell us a little bit about what motivated you to write this article, what drew your interest to this topic, and then sort of make the case for getting rid of government schools rather than reforming them. And we'll get into the more details after you do that.
Well, first of all, education was always a topic I was passionate about, even when I was like kind of a leftist when I was young, like a teenager. And for me, education is like the most important thing in all in every system people can defend, because you're like forming the future intellectual minds. You're forming like the future of your movement, the future of society, actually. So education was always like a hot topic for me. And basically, I started to see a lot of things, especially after 2016, related to education here in Brazil. The indoctrination was very high. Like we will talk about that later on, but we have a very high level of indoctrination in schools, not only leftist, but like critical theory indoctrination is very prevalent, is very common here. So it was something I was always intrigued by. And the usual responses I had, the usual answers I listened to on the right, especially here in the Brazilian political right, for me were not enough. And they were also engaging in kind of like a totalitarian space as well. They were going through like they wanted to regulate schools more, and schools needed to be like liberated, not necessarily regulated more. They wanted to like forbid topics of being certain topics are being discussed in school and stuff like that. And it was not very, although I agree that the topics were bad and that schools were using these topics as a tool for indoctrination, I never thought like we should forbid people from teaching them. So basically, education was always a topic for me, a thing that I was very interested about. And also I wanted to delve into more of what libertarian theory has to say about education and what we can do. So the second part of the question was about reform versus abolition, right?
Yeah. And actually, before, sorry, I asked a two-part question where I should have asked just one part, because I'd like to jump in here just to interrupt briefly. I love this point. I think it's something we should emphasize, which is why I decided to interrupt, how important education is to society, not just to libertarian principles or a libertarian movement, just to society in general. I mean, there may be people who don't share the worldview that we share in terms of libertarian political philosophy, who would still nevertheless benefit tremendously from educational freedom, from in the form of parents being able to decide what is best for their children. And who knows better? Who knows their children better than the parents, right? That definitely not some bureaucrat hundreds or thousands of miles away that's trying to legislate some universal system that really doesn't work for anybody. So I think that's an incredibly important point. And I want to share a quote here that I found as I was preparing for this episode from Thomas Jefferson that I think drives home this point in a different respect. He says, he recognized, and a lot of people use Thomas Jefferson in the United States as an example of a proponent of public education, but he did not believe in compulsory government education, and that's the key distinction.
Yeah.
But he says, if a nation expects to be ignorant and free in a state of civilization, it expects what never was and never will be. So the point he's making there is that to maintain a free society, you have to have an educated society. And the problem is, how do we get there, right?
Yeah.
So I think that sets us up for the next question. What's the case for reform, and what's the case for abolition of government schools?
Well, I used to agree more with the reform side, like until, I don't know, 6 months or so ago. But the case for reform, basically, from what I get, is like to do like a transition plan, to go from state schooling to private schooling through a transition plan. But I also started to see some flaws in that system as well. And then I started to be more a fan of abolition, because once you get public funding in private schools, the state has more power, and they will have more power to use that as a precedent to regulate more private schooling, to regulate more what the private schools can teach, to regulate what they can, for example, say, to regulate like, oh, private schools now cannot be religious because now the state is funding some students there. So what about the separation of church and state? Where does that when will that apply? And because of that, I started to see that reform is not necessarily a good place. I understand there are very well-intentioned, very well-meaning people in the reform side. I know, like Corey DeAngelis, for example, he's very big on the school voucher system, for instance. And I get it. I was like attracted more to this idea of reform, but the abolition case for me is more persuasive. If you guys want to know more about why the arguments for abolition, you can read like chapter, I don't know the number, I forgot the number, but like the chapter on For a New Liberty by Marina Rocha. I use that a lot in my text as well. The chapter on education, he talks about why abolition is preferable to reform, but basically it's because reform opens precedent and opens space for other pervasive regulations through the state in the private schooling system, basically.
Yeah. And you mentioned another of Murray Rothbard's works, Education Free and Compulsory, which is available on the Mises Institute website. So I'll link to that as well. Both are worth reading. I've talked about For a New Liberty on at least one episode previously, but on a different subject. So it's definitely a book worthwhile checking out because he covers a wide range of topics. Yeah, basically everything. Exactly. But the way I like to see the reform, and I was sort of in the same camp as you. I was sort of sympathetic to the reform movement for quite a while. And the problem in the way I see it is that it's almost like a fox in the hen house. Yeah, the fox will protect the hens from other intruders, from raccoons, from other foxes, but you're letting the most dangerous predator of all into the hen house, the fox itself, which obviously is representative of the government. So we are letting the government, through school choice, through vouchers, through educational savings accounts, whatever the mechanism is, into the arena of what was formerly private education. So I think there may be some improvement at the beginning, but the danger, of course, as you point out, is that the government will exert control over these institutions and say that if they don't comply with their dictates, they're no longer going to be eligible for this funding. Right? Is that fair? The fair assessment?
Yeah, sure. Totally agree with that.
Okay.
The hen house and the chickens is an argument that can be used for pretty much everything.
Right. The other thing too is that, I mean, we started out talking about the importance of education, right? And I don't even trust the government to deliver my mail. Why on earth would I trust the government with the most important component of my child's upbringing, other than forming a familial relationship with the mother and the father, right? I mean, the education is one of the most important components of a child's upbringing. So why would I entrust them with that when I don't even entrust them with my mail, right?
Yeah.
And that's I'm curious. Is there the same sort of deference to government among the general populace in Brazil? I know in the United States, people are very sort of state oriented, that sort of the default, if there's a problem, the default is to say the state should solve it. Is that common in Brazil as well?
Well, I think it's way stronger here, to be honest. People here love government, everyone, regardless of ideology. Although we have a very strong liberty movement, most people here love government. They love regulations. They love asking for the state to give them what they want. They think that everything the state gives is for free, and that they don't pay taxes to pay for that. So everyone here loves the government on every issue. So that's an article that's going to come up that I wrote for The Wire as well. I think it's coming up tomorrow, that I talked about how even carnival parties.
Yeah.
Even that, people think that should be public funded. They advocate for funding like state money, even for parties and for things like that. So here we are very, very state oriented, basically.
Wow. So here, I think what you're referring to as a carnival, we would say is more generally called a fair, maybe.
No.
We have carnivals as well, but
no, carnival is like a traditional party in Brazil, Brazilian carnival. It's like Mardi Gras.
Oh, okay, I see. Interesting. But they think that a lot of people think that those should be state-run events. Okay.
And it is state funded. Like the state fund pays for a lot of things.
Interesting. Okay. So your article goes into, obviously we talked about the case for reform and the case against reform and some of the issues with reform. But what are generally some of the problems that you see with, why should we care? What are we trying to fix? What's the problem with government schools as they are now?
Well, it probably is, I think we're trying to fix basically the passion for learning. I think that schools and the way the government runs it destroys the passion children might have for learning. Like, they destroy the curiosity. They destroy very important aspects of learning. Indoctrination, it's not only like it's a symptom. It's not like the cause of the problem. It's a symptom of government funded and government run schools. So I think we're trying to fix the passion for learning, and we're also trying to fix like the ability of parents and other people concerned with children to have a say in what children should learn, and to have more of a individual rights-based approach, basically. So we're trying to fix that. Yeah. I guess.
I like that point about obviously a lot of people, I think probably in Brazil, definitely in the United States, care about what viewpoints are being pushed in government schools and this indoctrination component. And that's part of the inherent issue with government schools, right? Is that lots of different children from different backgrounds with different parents with different values go to the same place, and they're treated exactly the same. And who gets to choose what values are presented, what views are presented, what principles are presented? And you're never going to satisfy everyone, which is part of the inherent problem with government schools in general. But as you say, the deeper issue is that government schools tend to stamp out or crush the spirit of the child and that spirit for learning that the child naturally has. I mean, how many children do you know that are less than 5 that have yet to go to school who don't ask a million questions? What is this? What is that? And they're just excited to learn and excited to know more. And then no more than a year or two into the government school, they've completely lost that curiosity, that passion for learning. And I think that's incredibly overlooked. Some people just tend to seem to accept that as sort of the natural progression.
Yeah. Something that, like a personal anecdote that happened with me, I only discovered that I liked to learn things when I was 17 and going out of high school and going to college. I only discovered that I like to read a lot of things, and on that time, like in school, I was only taught to memorize wrong things as well, related to the indoctrination part of things. So it's something really, really bad what they do in schools in general, basically.
Yeah. And in the United States, the typical sort of response from school administrators, from teachers unions in particular, is that we just need more money. People don't care enough about the teachers. They don't care enough about the schools. Don't you care about children? If you did, you would just send us more money. But that's obviously not the problem, at least in the United States, because if you look at a graph, and maybe I'll show one here in just a moment. I have one saved. If you look at a graph of funding, even adjusted for inflation, it's nearly straight up on the graph. And
it's like that in Brazil as well.
Right. And the results in terms of proficiency in math and reading and history are flat or down, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I'm going to share this graph. I got this from Daniel Mitchell, who's actually an advocate for reform, but nevertheless, I think makes a lot of great economic points about the problems with government schools. And I think there's a lot of common ground to be had between the people who advocate for reform and people who advocate for abolition. But I want to share this chart here. It's sort of, I think you can see it there. It says trends in American public schooling since 1970. And you can see, for people who are watching the podcast, the blue line is the funding, the cost of the schools.
200% increase.
200% increase between 1970 and 2010. And then if you look at the employees on the orange line, they've gone up steadily, but not nearly at the same rate as the cost. And then finally, the proficiency in math and reading, flat or down over the course of those 40 years. So that the title of the article where this, and I'll share this article in the show notes as well. The title of the article was that something like a picture paints 1,000 words or something. So I think that's true with respect to this graph. And I think you mentioned that this has basically been the same or true in Brazil as well. Is that correct?
Yes, basically the same.
Yeah. So one thing we talked a little bit about pre-show is obviously in the United States there is some top-down control from the federal level, but to a large degree, the states still have primary control over education in each state. What's the status? What's it like in Brazil?
Well, in Brazil, it's way worse, to be honest. The state, the federal level, the Ministry of Education, for example, oversees it all. And it's not just like, oh, kids should be reading, I don't know, 3 pages by the time they're like 6 or something like that. They also dictate what schools should teach and how they should teach subjects. And this comes with a very like left-wing bias, especially in the humanities. So they mandate a lot of things. For example, when I was in high school, I had like 15 subjects to study in high school for a year. And they were all mandatory. Like I had like 3 different types of mathematics, 3 different types of physics, 3 different types of chemistry, 3 different types of history. So everything is very heavily regulated, and it's also like universally regulated. So kids should learn a lot of topics, because they don't learn it all. You cannot, it's like humanly impossible to learn it all. And in the way that the state wants them to study. For instance, my mom was although she's not like a libertarian, but she also sees a lot of problems with our education system here in Brazil. So she was reading once about how in South Korea, where, okay, it's not a perfect system as well. I know they have like a lot of pressure. A lot of kids like go into depression, anxiety because of the system there, but at least they have like good, kids, I'm not saying it's a good system, but I'm saying that at least the kids there learn more things than kids in Brazil, for instance, learn. So she was seeing this thing that in 4th grade in South Korea, children learned like 5 different mathematics topics, but they learned it well. Here in Brazil, they just threw like 30 different subjects per year into a children's head and thought, and like just let them learn 3 different subjects and not learn anything at all. So we always have to be going back every year to the subjects we were supposed to learn in the last year, but that's because they want us to learn everything, and that's impossible almost. So there is this problem. Another problem I see with were you going to say something?
Oh, I was just going to say, sorry to interrupt. I was just going to say, whoever implemented that policy didn't believe in the principle that sometimes less is more. Right? It was just like the more the better.
But communists implemented this policy, so what would you expect, basically? Right. Yeah, they want to regulate everything. So another thing that I think it's really bad in our education here in Brazil is that learning becomes like something that's subjected to having an opinion. It's something teachers tell us all the time in school. Like, you had to have a critical opinion. It's something very prevalent in Brazilian schooling. Like, you learn not to learn topics, not to like understand things, and maybe as a consequence have an opinion about some topic. You learn to have an opinion. You need to have an opinion about everything. And that for me is like awful. You don't have to put this much pressure on children, especially teenagers, with peer pressure and everything. This is very prevalent, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I studied philosophy in college, and that's exactly the opposite of what so many philosophers suggested, was that the more you learn, the more you realize you don't know. And so the less inclined you are to actually develop or hold strong opinions, at least with respect to many things. You may hold a few and very heartfelt and very strong opinions on a few things, but with respect to many things, you're less likely to hold opinions the more you know. So again, the philosophy there is a bit odd, but as you said, if the socialist tendency, the socialist impulse there seems to have taken hold. So one thing I know you talk about in the article, the socialist calculation problem a little bit, and that's you don't get into the socialist calculation problem in detail. So for those who don't know what that is, basically it and Marina, you can chime in here to correct me where I mess up. But essentially, the idea is that without prices, without a pricing mechanism, that there is no signal, no market signal about what goods are demanded and how much supply there is. So that applies to things like cars and steel production and how much steel is needed to produce a car. Price will be a signal to the manufacturer as well as it is to the consumer, and it's the same with education. And the tendency where there is no market, so in a socialist system, is to either overproduce significantly or underproduce significantly, and that's true, just as true with education as it is with cars or any other product. Would you mind to say a little bit about that?
Yes, like in education, if there is no pricing system and everything is like state owned or heavily regulated by the state, it is really hard to, as you said, to know what the market is demanding, and not only what the market is demanding, but where you can more efficiently allocate resources. So we have issues like infrastructure problems in schools because they think the best way to allocate resources is through more salaries and more paid for the administrators and for teachers. Or we might have the other problem, the opposite problem as well, with the school is very good in terms of infrastructure, but the teachers might be like underpaid or something like that. So we have this problem as well, not only a moral problem in public schooling, but we have also an efficiency problem because of the economic calculation problem and because of how things are really bad, are run very bad by the state or by public collectivized ownership of the means of production, basically.
Yeah. So there's a lot more to say about why government schools are horrible ideas and horrible institutions for a better society. But we've talked about, obviously, the problem with the way that they treat children and the way that children, they sort of stamp out the curiosity of the child, the desire to learn. They also are incredibly inefficient because there is no pricing mechanism. And that actually goes along with your discussion about the subjects as well. Why are they teaching these children all these subjects? They're over emphasizing certain subjects when there's no demand for them. The children and the families don't care if you study 3 different forms of mathematics as a 10-year-old, right? So that's another example where the socialist calculation problem comes into play. But then also, they're incredibly inefficient and they don't produce desired results, and money can't fix the problem. So those are a lot of the high-level criticisms. Are there other criticisms that you'd like to mention before we talk more about the position for homeschooling, for unschooling, for private schooling in a little more detail?
Well, we have also something that's becoming more popular, especially online. You see these videos of discipline issues, right? Like children beating up other children, bullying, and all of this stuff. Here in Brazil, things are a little bit more pervasive. I don't know. I know you guys have this problem in the US as well. But here, if a child has a bad behavior, if the child does really bad things, even private schools, they cannot expel them. Because basically, because of our constitution, education is like a right, a constitutional right. In the same way, having the right to free speech and having the right to bear arms is a constitutional right in the United States, right? So because of that, if a school decides to expel this kid for bad behavior or decides to suspend him for bad behavior, like they cannot do it because this would be like denying the right of the universal constitutional right for an education. So we also have very bad discipline problems because of that, because it's impossible to expel a child from school here. It once happened, actually, a very bad thing in a school in my town, for instance, that a kid killed the other kid.
Wow.
In the school, like during break or something like that. This kid that killed the other one repeated, like he was doing the first year of high school for the 3rd time. had like a history of very bad behavior, like very bad, like that he should have been expelled, but the school could not expel him. So people had to live with this person that was like a danger to other students around. So because of that, a tragedy happened. Another kid was killed, and I didn't see anyone in the media discussing the main issue. That is, you cannot expel students here. That was the main issue that should be discussed, but no one actually seems to care here, as long as I see.
And that's a symptom, right, of a system that tries to turn an entitlement, a positive right,
Yeah,
into a constitutional right, and treat it like a negative right, like it's inherent to their humanity. I don't have any right to an education because any negative right, any human right to an education, because that imposes a duty on someone else, right? And that's exactly what's going on here. It sounds like with the Constitution in Brazil is that Brazil has said there's a right to an education, just like there is a right to defend yourself, and those are two totally different types of rights. One
yeah,
is a positive right that creates a duty on someone else, which is I think, more aptly called an entitlement. And the other is an actual human right, a right to preserve myself. And that's a huge problem, it sounds like, in Brazil.
yes. Our constitution is very positive rights based. And
Yeah,
one right kind of contradicts the other, which we can talk about in the homeschooling section, because there's something about homeschooling in Brazil that's kind of like ambiguous if it is allowed or not. And that's something that I'm really interested about as well.
interesting. Okay, yeah, we'll definitely get into that. And just so folks know, I'll link to a few points that we touched on. I had, as some may remember, Jonathan and Adriana Prescott on two previous episodes, actually, to talk about homeschooling. And they talk a lot about this point that actually Marina was talking about uh, this sort of idea that kids need to go to school to be socialized. And I'm sure this idea is prevalent in Brazil as
Yeah,
well. But really, what are we doing? We're forcing them into a system where they're segregated based on age, not on proficiency, not on ideas, not on merit, just simply based on age. And we are forcing them to interact with people that they wouldn't ever interact with in the real world. So it's totally disconnected from reality. That's not how the real world works.
works.
So we're socializing them in a way that has no application to real life, or very little application to real life. And part of that, a symptom of that, can be this violence, right? Where you're forcing people to interact who wouldn't otherwise interact, and bullying and those sorts of problems.
Yes.
So, would you agree with that? Is that fair
Yeah, I
characterization?
would agree with that. I don't
Yeah,
know. This is one of the causes of violence, but I don't know the other causes. There are, I probably guess, more causes to violence as well. Like,
sure.
I don't know, psychopaths exist. I'm not saying
Yeah,
everyone's a psychopath, but
yeah,
bad people exist, unfortunately.
yeah,
But this thing that forces this forcing of people to talk and to be like in the same room in a very artificial environment is really something that can lead to violence. I totally
yeah,
agree with that.
yeah, yeah. I agree, and that's a good point. It's not the cause of violence, but it may be a contributing factor. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So the other thing is that I also recorded an episode previously about positive and negative, right? So I'd encourage people to go back and listen to that episode as well. I think that's an important distinction that helps clarify a lot of the confusion there is in the public discourse about rights. Even in the United States, people say, oh, I have a right to health care. I have a right to an education. I have a right to make a living. I have a right to a living wage. I have a right to all these things. Okay. Those are all positive rights. And I think
Yeah.
confuse the nature of rights. So
And each one you mentioned is in our constitution as well.
oh, wow. Okay. See, these are things that people are advocating for in the United States. They're not
uh,
in the Constitution, but people,
yeah,
yeah, yet, exactly. Yeah. Unfortunately, I think we're moving that direction.
yeah,
Uh, so let's talk a little bit about what are the alternatives. So government schools are not a good option. Reform while maybe better, maybe for a little while, is still not a good long-term solution. So what are the alternatives?
Deregulation, completely liberating the schooling market, the educational market, for parents to have more choice, and for entrepreneurs. Actually, that's something really big in Austrian economics as well. The role of the entrepreneur, for entrepreneurs to see what opportunities and what value they can create in society in the educational market. So I think a complete deregulation of this system would be a very good start. Also, we would probably reduce prices because it would increase the supply of schools as well. Another thing that it is an alternative is homeschooling. In the US, I know that there is a very big market, homeschooling market. I'm not saying like it's perfect. Things are hard. Homeschooling is very hard. But homeschooling here, it's something I'm really like an advocate for. I also, it's something that I think it's an alternative as well. So deregulating private schools and homeschooling would be my go-to answers to the education problem, basically.
So there's you may not be familiar with him, but one of my favorite members of Congress is Thomas Massie.
I really like him.
Okay, there you go. Well,
I'm a big fan of him.
he has on several occasions proposed a bill to eliminate the Department of Education in the United States. Of course, it never gets any traction because there are too many special interests and politicians attached to those special interests to make that happen. And there's not enough political will to make that happen yet either. I hope that eventually happens, but I don't have my hopes up. But the good news is that there are more and more people who do agree with him and are seeing, how can I make a change despite the government involvement in this area? And luckily, many states, even though there's not much movement at the federal level to deregulate education, there is a big movement at the state level. And many states impose little or no regulation on homeschooling. So that's a great movement here in the United States. In fact, especially it sped up during the pandemic, during COVID.
Yeah.
And I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but the number of homeschoolers went up tremendously during COVID. And many of them continued to homeschool after the schools reopened.
Yeah, COVID was like really bad. The lockdowns were terrible. One thing people sometimes don't understand about how things were in Brazil during this time is that although the president back then was like anti-lockdown and anti-mandates and quarantines, our Supreme Court, who is actually a problem right now, they've been a problem since like 2019 or something like that. But our Supreme Court ruled that the states should have a say. The states would regulate lockdowns. So regardless of what the president said. So if the president did not issue a lockdown, but the state did, everyone who was stuck in that state had to follow the state's orders, basically. So because of that, in my town, for instance, the mayor closed schools for a year and a half, even private schools, not only public schools. Public schools, they only opened in January 2022, because here our school year also starts it's different from the US. We start school in February, and then we ended in December because seasons here are backwards. Like we're in autumn right now. We're in fall. We're having fall while you guys are in springtime. So the schools only opened, the public ones, on February 2022, but the private schools were only allowed to fully reopen on September 2021 or something like that. So this made a lot of parents, very concerned parents, rightfully so, very mad here. I don't know if it increased homeschooling, but I don't have the data for Brazil, but I do have the data for like how it made them wake up to the current situation of our educational institutions. A lot of groups of mom groups appeared during this time. They're still active, but now they're talking about other topics such as indoctrination, the freedom to do homeschooling and things like that. So COVID was really bad, but in times of crisis, that's when also there's a good opportunity for change. So we can see like the both sides of the issue.
Yeah, yeah, I agree with that totally. I think lots of people are not as receptive to change when times are stable. So when things are less certain, I think people are more open minded to change, and I think that's a huge reason why it's a good opportunity to speak up and to continue to promote these ideas and these principles, especially during difficult times. So totally agree with that. Uh, One thing I'd like to uh, talk about, I've got a few resources I'd like to point out myself, I think that are very valuable for people who are more interested in homeschooling, more interested about these ideas. Obviously, I'd encourage people to follow your work at the Mises Institute and the Mises Institute in general. The other thing, too, you mentioned a Wired article that's going to be coming out
No,
tomorrow.
Wire, Mrs.
Wire.
Wire. Sorry.
Mises Wire. Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
no worries. What's that article about? Is it a
about subsidies in public parties, basically,
okay? Okay.
using the example of Brazil and carnival subsidies, like public funding for parties and events and things like that, and how
Okay.
this does not make any sense. Like I'm starting to write more regarding Austrian economics and libertarian theory right now. So I kind of try to do a, a mix of topics. I'm talking about that. Next week, I'm submitting an article about war. That's something I'm really big
Oh,
on,
very cool.
and where I differ from Brazilian libertarians as well. That's another topic. But
Well, let's talk about that just a little bit. I know it's
okay,
somewhat off topic,
no,
uh,
sure.
but first of all, we're recording this on Wednesday. This episode will come out on Friday, so be sure to. I'll keep an eye out for your Mises Wire article, and if I have time to include it in the show notes, I'll include it.
Yeah,
But and this is tangentially related to the topic of school. We didn't talk about this yet, but the history of public schooling or government schooling is somewhat, at least in the United States, related to war, right?
yeah,
To try to instill discipline and uniformity
yeah,
among the
like a
population.
military discipline.
Yeah, exactly. You mind to say a little bit about that?
Well, yeah. In terms of things in Brazil, I don't know. We don't have much of the war problem, thank heavens, but
Yeah.
I've seen, like through Rothbard's writings, how public education was always used in the USA case and also in Prussia when Germany was forming as a country or something like that. They used schooling as like a tool for creating a military army, basically. They, for instance, there is a guy that I mentioned in my article that compared schooling with military discipline and how we should form a strong army through schools. So it's very related to wars, not necessarily only through indoctrination for war, but also through the discipline and not the good type of discipline, because there is two types of discipline. Sure, as with anything, there is the good discipline to learn how to focus on things, how to keep a schedule, how to like work well, and there is like the bad discipline that turns into like authoritarianism and things like that. So schools always like tend to enforce the bad type of discipline and forget about the good type, forget about teaching people how to be actually disciplined. So there is something that always happened. The relation between education and war is very pervasive. Like a lot of people compared one of the guys I also quote in the article. I'm very bad with like people's names. Okay, so there's that. But another guy that I quote in the article talks about that as well. That if the state has the power to conscript people, the state should also have the power to mandate schools. So they see these two topics as a very interconnected topics. So that's basically it.
So this is really interesting to me. This sort of history behind the government schools, this sort of Prussian model that you
Yeah,
talk about in the article, and how it was meant basically as a tool of indoctrination, of conformity. It was not meant to really educate people, to create independent thinkers, to create people who uh, had self-learning, who developed a skill or a desire to learn on their own, but really to develop a class of followers for the ruling elite,
yeah,
and that was really the basis, the model behind this government schools in the United States, and it sounds like in Brazil as well, but maybe not with the thought of war in mind as much in Brazil.
Yeah, in Brazil is more like the thought of creating citizens. They call it citizens, but citizens as a very authoritarian thing, like citizens like belonging to the state, basically. They want to create children for the state, for politics, not for learning. And politics is one topic of learning. We have another pretty much very different topics, and it's just like the tip of the iceberg. There are a lot of different things you can do through learning. So that's something we have here.
But that's an example, right, of how the state treats children like it's the state's children. They're not the state's; they're the children of the parents.
Exactly.
And so it's the state intervening in one of the most intimate components of family life, and that's the rearing of the child as if it were the state's child, which I just think is complete separation of morality and the family. So huge problem. And we see that here in the United States as well, maybe not to the same degree in the educational realm, but certainly at a high level or significant level. Which is interesting. And this brings me back to the quote I shared at the beginning from Thomas Jefferson, that this idea that to have a free society, we need an educated populace, right? But even he, like I said, didn't advocate for compulsory schooling. And I think people take his position on public schools or on the need for public schools way too far, because he also goes on and says it's better to tolerate the rare instance of a parent refusing to let his child be educated than to shock the common feelings and ideas by the forcible asportation and education of the infant against the will of the father. So he recognizes that it's not the government's child, it's not the state's child. And it sort of identifies this problem, right? That while a free society needs an educated society, you can't have a free society and also compulsion. And that's the entire point that you make in this, or a big part of the point that you're making in this article.
Yeah, I wanted to talk a little bit more about homeschooling because I don't know if this is off topic or not.
Oh no, I'm happy to go this way. I'm happy to talk about homeschooling some more.
Yeah, because here in Brazil, homeschooling is the Supreme Court ruled out in the end of 2018, I guess, that homeschooling is illegal and that every child should be at least enrolled in a public school. But there is also other legislation in Brazil, because our constitution, I just looked it up. We have like 328 pages in a constitution. So of course, one positive right will contradict another positive right in this thing. Like if you're writing like 328 pages of positive rights, something is going to contradict the other thing, basically. So our constitution always says that parents should have a saying in what moral things, in the moral education of children and in what their children should learn. And we also have the Children's Act that is very worshipped by the left because it prohibits things like child labor and other things. But at the same time, in this piece of legislation that was supposed to be like a left-wing piece of legislation, there's also this right guaranteed in that parents every child has a right to receive the same moral education as their parents want to. So I have two friends in Brazil. If you want to talk more about the specifics of legislation in Brazil, I can get to
it. Yeah, sure. I'm happy to.
In touch with them, but they are helping parents to navigate, parents who want to homeschool. There is a homeschooling community in Brazil, but they do this kind of like a hidden shadow thing because it's kind of illegal, and the child services can take out their children because of that. So they help parents who want to homeschool to navigate through this legislation, how to use the armors of the state, to use the weapons the state uses against us, to use against the state. So this is something that is really interesting, and I'm really enjoying. I really enjoy
Yeah.
following here.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. So, as you say, a constitution of positive rights has created a situation here where the rights of the child conflict with the rights of the parent according to the Constitution.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah. So that's yeah. I mean there's not much of a better example of government treating I don't know, treating people, not just the parent, not just the child, as if they're not autonomous individual moral beings. They're just subjects. And you have the rights that we say you have, not the rights that you're born with, not your
Yeah.
natural rights. Yeah. So you mentioned your friends are helping people sort of navigate this. How are they doing that? How do people know to reach out to them?
Well, they through social media, basically.
Okay,
They
gotcha.
have, they're not very big on social media, but they pass their contacts in the homeschooling community in Brazil. Last year, I went to an homeschooling event. I was very impressed by the quality of people there, and not only the quality, intelligence everyone seemed to have there, which is not what the mainstream says about homeschoolers. They say there are a bunch of crazy people that teach children crazy conspiracy theories and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But that's but this is not true at all, at least from my experience seeing homeschoolers here in Brazil. So basically they go through social media, they go through contact passing. A mother wants to homeschool their child and does not know what to do, so she asks someone and someone has their number. So it's through informal advertising and through social media.
Yeah.
They give this advice. One of them, they are actually married, so one of them gives the legal advice because she's a lawyer, and the other one that was studied sociology in school, in college, he gives the more content based guidance, because some parents, they just want to homeschool, but they do not know what to do, what's the best curriculum, what they should teach. So they help them navigate through these things here.
Well, speaking of that, what resources would you point people to if they have more interest in homeschooling? Do you have any resources that you'd recommend, or content that you'd recommend they follow? Or like I said, obviously I'll encourage people to follow you. Do you have other resources that you'd like to point out to people?
Well, although I think she's more on the reform camp, but I really like her podcast, the podcast from Carrie McDonald
Oh,
from
sure.
Foundation of Economic Education. She
Yeah.
talks about how different initiatives in not public schooling, but in the education market. So I really like to listen to her. She talks a lot about not only homeschools, but cooperatives, and also micro schools as well, unschooling. So this is a very good source. I recently discovered as well, I'm not an expert on content related things on homeschooling, but I recently discovered that there's this network of homeschoolers called Classical Conversations. I guess they are more on the religious side of things, but they also provide very good resources for parents who want to start homeschooling and doing things like that.
So Carrie McDonald, as you said, is with Fee. I can't remember the name of her podcast. Is it
it's
Liberated? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. I'm gonna include that in the show notes. I enjoy her work as well. She seems to sort of advocate for as many options as possible.
Yeah.
So she's sort of
what I like about her podcast.
She's sort of in both camps, the reform and the abolition, to some degree. So she's great. Has lots of great conversations. I also like Hannah Frankman. She runs the Rebel Educator Twitter page.
I follow this page as well. I didn't know who
Okay.
could run it, but
yeah, Hannah Frankman. I'll link to her Twitter or her X page as well. It's great. And then I really enjoyed the Homeschool Life, or the book by the people who are behind the Homeschool Life LLC, Jonathan Prescott and Adriana Prescott. Kids Don't Need School. I thought they had an excellent book as well. So I'll link to all those resources in the show notes. And Marina, if you think of anything else that you'd like to share with our listeners, don't hesitate to send me an email, and I'll include it in the show notes as well. So one thing before we close up, we're coming up on an hour here. I'd like just your perspective on this a little bit. Obviously, Javier Milei was elected in Argentina as the
Yeah,
president there, and Argentina and Brazil. I've never been to South America, but I
yeah,
understand they share a little bit of a border, right?
yeah. We have a border.
Have you noticed much of an influence in Brazil based on the excitement there in Argentina?
Well, it made us it made the libertarian community in Brazil that was very big already. It made us more hopeful because here we are facing a lot of bad problems. The socialists just got elected last year. Yeah, 2 years ago actually. So people are kind of like very sad and were kind of like very pessimistic about things in the politics world and in the current things world. Everyone was like very kind of really pessimistic, was seeing that everything's going to be bad and we're never going to have like a libertarian revolution or something like that in Brazil. But Javier Milei raised everyone's hopes up. So everyone here is really happy about that. Although we're in Latin America, we're kind of different from other Latin American countries. Like our culture is kind of different. Like because we speak another language, we don't speak Spanish, we speak Portuguese, and like we have different influences. We're kind of like different. Not saying all the countries who speak Spanish are like the same because they're not, but we're kind of a little bit different from them culturally. But at the same time, this Javier Milei thing, his election, also helped us to be more united with our Spanish speaking liberty movement. So it's something that made everyone here really happy, and everyone's following and everyone is like hoping that this thing works out. And some
Yeah.
things are already working out, but we'll see how things play out in the next years and things like that.
Yeah, very cool. I think the election of Javier Milei had the same effect on many in the libertarian
In
movement
the
in the United
US.
States, but probably not to the same degree that it has in Brazil. I'm guessing. I don't know. Obviously, can't compare the two, um, but I would suspect it's had a greater effect in Brazil.
Yeah, some people here traveled to Argentina to not only his election, but also to his inauguration as well.
Yeah. So many people are just so in the United States are so infatuated with politics in the United States, don't pay much attention to politics in other countries.
Yes.
I was more excited about the election of Javier Milei than I have been about a presidential election in the United States in ever.
Yeah, I
But so
was
many
like that as
people,
well.
yeah, exactly. Uh, One thing I know Argentina, a big motivation behind the movement that eventually led to the election of Javier Milei was inflation and
Yeah,
how horrible inflation was getting in Argentina. Is Brazil suffering from some of the same horrible inflation?
not yet,
Okay.
but I predict we will suffer because what is happening here is things here are kind of like backwards compared to the US in some instances. Like our Supreme Court is bad. Not saying the Supreme Court in the US is good, but they made some kind of like, in terms of libertarian decisions, they made some good decisions and like on some instances to promote more federalism recently. But here our Supreme Court is bad. And another thing is that our Federal Reserve is right now good
Oh,
because
interesting.
because the guy that was appointed to the Federal Reserve here in Brazil, he was appointed in the last government. And the last government had a much more like a Chicago school influence, not Austrian, but it's still not like communist. That's the
Yeah,
influence they have right now. So between a Chicago school economist and like a socialist economist, of course, I'm going to prefer the Chicago school one.
sure.
So the guy is not lowering interest rates. There is a big
Okay.
push for him to do that, but he's not. He's being like very more monetarily responsible. So we're not facing inflation yet. But this guy is going to, his mandate will end this year in 2024, and our president will appoint another guy. And we are really kind of afraid of who he might appoint, because if it is like a Marxist, or here we have like a different school of thought that I guess you guys have in the US as well, not MMT, but we have the Keynesian
Oh,
and
Keynesian,
Marxist.
yes. Yeah.
Yeah, Keynesian
Yeah.
and Marxist fusionism. And
Okay.
a lot of economists here are from
Yeah.
that type of school. So if we
Yeah.
appoint someone like that, we will have like the worst of both worlds.
Yeah, that's a very common school of thought in the United States, at least among sort of elite economic circles.
But
sort of just the idea that you can print money and have almost no consequence, which is just bizarre.
In the economic discourse in Brazil, for you guys to have like reference of how bad it is, you know Paul Krugman, right?
Yes.
He in Brazil would be considered right wing.
Oh, interesting. Wow.
In economics, like a conservative economist.
Yeah. No, I listened to, are you familiar with Tom Woods? He's been engaged in the Mises Institute, in the Mises University. Yeah. He did a podcast for a while with Bob Murphy, who's an economist. Contra Krugman. Right? Exactly. Yeah. So I listened to that for quite a while until that podcast ended. So I heard a lot about Paul Krugman. And actually, it's still worthwhile for folks who don't know the names that we're talking about. If you go and look up Tom Woods and Contra Krugman, it's a great, still relevant, really, episodes to listen to. So
yeah. So we're kind of afraid of that because the government is also spending money like crazy. Like there's no tomorrow. They're spending money, but the thing that's saving us is the more monetarily responsible Federal Reserve chair we have right now.
Okay. So is the Fed there supposed to be an independent organization, like it's supposed to be here, at least theoretically?
So it was not independent until our previous government, but then the government approved like, I don't know, a legislation, something like that made the Federal Reserve here independent. So because of that, we have this guy, and this guy has an independent mandate regarding to the president. So he was appointed in 2020, and he will only go out in 2024. So the president is supposed to not have interference in monetary policy, which helps a little bit because in the election cycle here, presidents, if they had the power to dictate what the Federal Reserve should do, they tend to tell them to print more money, to lower interest rates, to make things seem nice, to be reelected. So it's supposed to be independent as well.
Okay. Well, Marina, thanks so much for tagging along. We've gone a little over an hour. I don't want to keep you too much longer. And sorry, everybody, we got a little bit astray from our main topic, but when libertarians meet other libertarians, there's no shortage of things to talk about, right? So I hope everybody will go and check out Marina's article. The only good one is a closed one, No Reform of Government Schools. That's at Mises.org. And of course, as we mentioned earlier, she'll have an article coming out on the Mises Wire as well, which I'll try to link to in the show notes. Marina, aside from the Mises Institute, where else can people find your work? Do you have published work anywhere else, or are you on social media anywhere where people can follow you?
Well, I'm in social media. I don't have any other published works besides the ones I'm doing right now because, as I said in the podcast, I'm starting to write more things now. But I'm at social media. I mostly speak in Portuguese there, but Google Translate sometimes work. Like most of the time, they translate things well, at least as I check sometimes. So I'm on X, formerly known as Twitter, at M4, instead of an A, there's a 4. Marina Rocha, ROCHA 31. So it's Marina Rocha 31. And in the first A, there is a 4 instead of an A because that's what the username allowed. So
and we connected on X, so I will certainly share your handle there to make it easy for folks to find you. Marina, thanks again for joining the show. Is there anything else you'd like to say or add before we close up the show?
Oh, thanks for having me. It was a pleasure. That's my first interview ever in a language that's not my primary language. It was like a challenge, but I really enjoyed it.
Okay, very cool. Well, I hope I wasn't too difficult to understand. I have a little bit of a Southern accent, even though I'm from Indiana. So it was very easy to have a conversation with you. I enjoyed it very much. So thanks again.
Thanks for having me.
All right. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the show. Like I said, please check out Marina's article at the Mises Institute website. And as always, Don't forget to like and subscribe to help us spread the message of freedom. You can always find our show on YouTube, Rumble, Facebook, and all of the most popular podcast streaming platforms. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Forge of Freedom. Be sure to subscribe wherever you heard this podcast so you never miss a future episode. For more information or to connect with Alex, you can go to forgeoffreedom.com or follow him on Twitter at Forge of Freedom. Until next time, remember, you are the Forge of Freedom.